the reason for this is fairly obvious. Big things have deeper voices than little things. Elephants deeper than mice. And you need to worry more about big things than you do about little things because they tend to be a lot more serious and dangerous. So we have this connection that deep voices are more to be taken seriously.
It's time! Work, play, evolve!
I want to connect the listeners to the best of the best. Welcome to the Evolved Broker Podcast. I am your host, Pat Costello, the co-founder and principal at Evolve MGA. Our mission for the podcast is to bring the insurance industry the best of the best. In this episode, I got a chance to connect with the top-rated international speaker on sounds and communication skills. His name is Julian Treasure, and his 5 TED Talks have been watched more than 100 million times. His TED Talk, How to Speak So That People Want to Listen, is the number 7 most viewed TED Talk of all time. Quality communication is the cornerstone of success. It allows us to be persuasive, memorable, and create change. Many times at the workplace, we wonder why we're not being heard. We also may wonder why others may not be listening. Julian's mission is to help people and organizations listen better and create healthier and more effective sound, including speaking. This includes speaking in front of audiences or speaking conversationally with a coworker, family member, or friend. I spoke with him about how to prepare and deliver an excellent talk, major habits to avoid when speaking, and tools that will make our words more powerful. Please download, subscribe, and leave a review on whatever platform you are listening on, and feel free to reach out to me at pat@evolvedbrokerpodcast.com with any comments or suggestions for the podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by First Insurance Funding. First is the leading premium finance company in insurance and is known throughout the industry for their personalized service and quote flexibility. If you're tired of sending quote requests for smaller premiums to multiple companies, not leaving enough time to negotiate larger opportunities, then choose First as your primary financing source and experience the First difference today. Without further ado, here's Julian. Julian, welcome to the Evolved Broker Podcast.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
In your TED Talk, How to Speak So That People Want to Listen, you walk the audience through a warm-up. And I was actually thinking of doing the warm-up prior to our recording, but I thought it'd be a lot more valuable if we just did it live on camera so the audience could be aware of it. As we're jumping into this, would you mind walking me through the warm-up that you advise that people do before they're about to have a big conversation or give a big talk?
Of course, yeah. It's there are many, many, many warm-up exercises that theatrical people do, actors do, singers do, and so forth. So these are easy ones that I've collected over the years that I find I can do pretty much anywhere. If there's a backstage area, if I'm doing a big talk, or if there's even a bathroom without too many people in it, because they will think you're slightly strange if you go and start doing these things.
Right.
So a couple of important pieces of equipment, really, that we need to make sure that we've got on our side. The first is the lungs. Your voice is just breath. And it's often the case that we go a whole day without actually taking a really deep breath and expanding our lungs and our chest. So let's do that now. We're going to breathe deeply in. If you like, you can raise your arms, and then we're going to kind of moan out. So like that. Okay, so for anybody who's practicing along with us, that may be the first deep breath you've taken today. It's a really good thing, if you care about your voice, to develop a breathing practice. We can talk more about that later, perhaps. Okay. Second very important piece of equipment is the lips. Now, there are 2 exercises we can do for the lips. The first is to do what you would have done when you were little, when you were cold, which is just to go That's it. Good stuff, Patrick. You've got it. And the other one is a pronounced bo, B-O-H, if you like, bo.
Bo.
And you really want to make the lips work on this. So bo, bo,
Bo.
bo,
Bo. Bo.
bo.
Bo. Bo. Bo. Bo.
Very good. Now, you may feel now that your lips have somewhat woken up, which is the objective there.
They do
The
feel
next-
different. They do definitely feel different.
Good stuff. The next very important piece of equipment for us is the tongue, because when your tongue's not with you, it's very difficult to speak properly. It's not quite going to work. So 2 exercises for the tongue. The first is la, but in a very pronounced way. So this is like press-ups for the tongue almost. You go right from the back of your palate to the front in a very exaggerated way. So la, 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 la.
La, 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 la.
Very good. And the other exercise, which took me months to practice because I never used to be able to do this, is to roll an R. So you go. That's it. Now your mouth is fully awake and ready to give its best for you. And the final exercise is one for the vocal cords. And this is the one I will do if I only have time for one, or if I can only do one for whatever reason. This is the most important one.
Okay.
The actors call it the siren.
Okay.
And what we do is we go we, or. The we is as high as you can go, and the or is as low as you can go. So it's kind of like a sine wave going from high to low to high to low. So here we go. We, or. We, or. We.
Wee.
That's it. Now you may, as you're doing that, spot some discontinuities, some breaks, and then you can smooth those out by doing this. And you'll also find that after doing this a few times, your voice may pitch down at least a tone. And so that's a wonderful exercise to get your vocal cords with you. So there you are, some simple vocal warm-ups, whether you're proposing marriage or standing, about to stand on stage in front of 10,000 people, they're worth doing.
Thank you so much for helping us start off with that. Is there like a drink or something that you'd recommend? Like I know a lot of singers seem to drink tea. Is there anything like that that you think helps?
Oh, there are a lot of physical things. In my course, my wonderful fiancée, Jane Magendie, who's a 4-time world champion martial artist and yoga expert, does a whole chapter called Fit to Speak. And it's a non-trivial thing. You would think, oh, I'd just walk on stage and speak. But no, actually warming up not just the voice, but the body is very important. So there are all sorts of stretches you can do to start testosterone flowing around your body. I don't know if you've seen Amy Cuddy's famous TED Talk on throwing power poses, just like this. Making yourself bigger immediately releases testosterone into your body and makes you feel stronger and more confident, and it combats nerves. Cool. So that's a good thing to do in a bathroom before you're on stage. If you're feeling nervous, just a few of these and you start to feel much better. But yes, in terms of preparing yourself, otherwise, nutrition and hydration are very important. So ideal not to eat a huge sugary thing an hour before you go on stage, or you're going to talk because you'll be in sugar crash right when you don't need it. So long burn things, porridge is great, fruit, or not the sugary type of fruit, but something perhaps lower glycemic index that's going to keep you going for the period you need. And yes, hydration, absolutely crucial. So room temperature water is good to sip. Ideally not freezing cold drinks and not piping hot drinks. And herbal tea with honey in it is excellent. I love coffee, but I do try not to overindulge in coffee just before I go on stage for 2 very good reasons. One is coffee's a diuretic, and that can become pretty uncomfortable. That's the other thing to remember on stage, by the way, is a quick visit to the bathroom. I mean, I've I've had talks where I've been sitting in the audience for a long time before going on, and it can get very awkward. You can feel very uncomfortable, and it removes your consciousness, your concentration. Coffee, perhaps not, because it stimulates you and it can overstimulate you. So your heart rate is already going to be up a little bit if you're nervous.
Yeah.
So herbal tea, honey, warm, lovely, or room temperature water, sipping it, almost gargle. I mean, I often do gargle with room temperature water before I go on stage. Just tip the head back and like that with the water. It's all lubricating those vocal cords, which they are your best partner, and that you really need to look after them.
Yeah, I'm excited because all this advice is so timely for me, because next week I actually have to give a best man speech.
Yeah, well, there you are.
Yeah.
Crucial. So I'm sure you've got the jokes all lined up, and you can visualize yourself, but we can talk about, all the aspects of public speaking, if you like, because I didn't really have time to get into that in that TED Talk about how to speak so that people want to listen.
Yeah.
I did pitch it to TED originally. I said I want to do talk and public speaking all in one, and they said that's too much.
Oh,
and
wow.
They were right. It would have been too much.
Well,
so I do a whole chapter on public speaking in my course, and this is the thing that many people find very intimidating, very scary making, because the great nightmare that we all have is walking on stage and drying up, looking like an idiot in front of many people, and that sort of strikes terror into our hearts for some reason. It must be to do with ego. It must be to do with our sense of self-worth and our need to be respected and liked and so forth. But when you're talking in public, when you're standing there and there's a room of 100 or 1,000 or however many it is looking at you, there's nowhere to hide. You are the center of attention. And that's why I love it, because it's the time in life when you have to be most conscious. And to me, all of my work about speaking and about, crucially, listening, which is even more important, is all about enhancing consciousness, being more present in life, doing. So, when you're standing there, every gesture needs to be conscious. The way you stand needs to be conscious. Your pace, your prosody, all the what I call the vocal toolbox, all the tools in that vocal toolbox need to be deployed consciously. That is such a joy, because you're really in touch with who you are as a human being and how you're connecting with people, and you're doing it intentionally, consciously, and hopefully beautifully.
Julian, do you have any advice for someone that's trying to get more comfortable on stage when speaking to a large crowd?
Well, I have a little acronym that I deploy about public speaking as you're going onto the stage. I mean, we can talk about content in a minute, because knowing what you're going to say is really important.
Right.
So let's assume the first acronym I use is PPD, which is practice, prepare, deliver. And that's what Olympic athletes will do, except they don't talk about deliver, they talk about execute their game plan or their whatever it is, their race. So I talk about practice, that is practicing the skill of public speaking, which of course you can do in many different ways. I mean, there's things like Toastmasters all over the world where you can go and practice talking in front of people and just get more and more comfortable. It's like riding a bike. It's like doing anything. The first time you ever drove a car, your fingers were welded to the wheel and you were absolutely terrified. Now, when you drive a car, you're thinking about anything but driving a car. You're unconsciously competent now. So it's a question of getting to that stage, past the consciously competent to the unconsciously competent stage. And you do that by practice. Then when you know you've got a talk to give, it's prepare. That's rehearse. Not to the point where you're a robot, but to the point where you know it so well you can jazz with it and you're comfortable with it. So that first TED Talk I gave back in 2009 about the 4 effects of sound, that was the first time anybody had ever used sound in a TED Talk. And so I rehearsed it to death. I mean, I must have done it 50 times before I went to TED. So I knew it well enough that when I walked on the stage there, I was really happy and excited to be delivering it. And I had no fear that I was going to forget where I was or not know what I was going to say next. And as I say, crucially, happy enough and comfortable enough to jazz with it. So I don't read words. It's made up on the spot, but I know exactly where I'm going. And then the deliver, well, let's talk about that. So you're sitting in the audience, you're about to walk up on stage in front of your wedding audience or in front of however many people it might be for whatever it might be. And the acronym here is BESS. And that stands, the very first one is really important, breathe. You know, if you're feeling very nervous, your voice could go a little bit like, hello, everybody. You know, and that can happen to all of us if we're very nervous. What's the antidote to that? Breathe. A huge in-breath, and that will calm your nerves. It will settle your voice. And of course, it is the fuel for your voice. Your voice is just breath, as I said earlier. So a deep in-breath, prepare to speak, and you're fueled up and less nervous. The E of Bess, as you walk on stage and turn to face the audience, is to expand your awareness. I am not a fan of the adage of speaking to one person at a time. I've seen many speakers do that, and they get stuck on one person, actually. So that person sitting in the audience going, why does he keep looking at me? I've seen that so many times. Or you bounce between two people and just, you know, end up talking to two people. Everybody else feels ignored. I love taking in the whole room. And the way you do that is by focusing on your peripheral vision, not your kind of foveal focused vision. So you can practice that very easily by putting your fingers up here and wiggling them, and then just moving your hands back to the point where you can only just see the wiggle. Try that now, everybody, and you'll find that your forehead smooths out. Your face looks less, you know, when we're focused, we get a bit frowny and like that. And as you do this, your face will open out. And if you're in that state, then you can see the whole room at the same time. You're still going to kind of look around and be conversational with the audience, but you see all of them all the time. And that's very, very useful. So I love connecting with the audience as a gestalt, you know, the audience as one person, not one person in the audience.
When you're focusing
so
on
that's the
when you're focusing on the whole audience with your peripherals, are you doing any specific head movements to make sure if it's, you know, a large room, are you doing any specific head movements to make sure that at least they're feeling engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, I will look around the room and I'll talk for a bit like this and then like this. And, you know, you glance from different part to different part, and it's quite nice to cover them all so they all feel that you're connecting directly with them, as long as you're seeing the whole lot all the time and not focusing on one person over there. So that's the expand. And then there are two S's in BESS. The first S is stance. Now, this is really important in order to make a connection with people and to establish yourself as a powerful speaker. Over the years, many years ago, I've done a number of quite long, you know, multi-day courses in public speaking and that kind of thing. And I remember one where the whole first day was on how you stand. And they wouldn't let you gesticulate at all. So the people who are naturally like this had their hands down by their sides and their fingers were flapping madly because they weren't allowed to move their arms. There is a kind of neutral stance you can get into that's very good to look at and not distracting. And not distracting people is a big part of this. So the way I get into that stance is a visualization, which I will share with you and the audience right now.
Okay.
So you stand, or you can do this sitting. We're both sitting. You do it sitting. Visualize that you have a string attached to the top of your head, and the entirety of you is dangling from that string. Now, immediately your shoulders fall down and back.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're standing, you relaxed, you're not tense. It's not a locked up kind of tense, rigid stance. It's a loose, relaxed, still potentially athletic stance where you're ready to move, but you're not moving. And if you're doing that, you're upright, not sort of hunched over, your shoulders aren't up, you're not lopsided like this, which is distracting if somebody's lopsided when they're speaking. And most of all, you're not evincing verbal, physical tics, which are very distracting. Walking round and round on the spot, jiggling from leg to leg, that kind of thing can be extremely distracting. So you're looking strong, confident, relaxed. And that visualization will do that. By the way, if you are somebody who has trouble standing still, you can also visualize roots going from your feet into the ground. And that's a very powerful visualization to root you to the spot. Now, I'm not saying don't move if you're, like Tony Robbins, he moves like a tiger on the stage.
Right.
So it's fine to move who you are intentionally, consciously, but not unconscious tics, not the little walk 5 paces to the right, the little walk 5 paces to the left, and then repeat and repeat endlessly. That's just distracting to everybody.
Yep.
Is he going over there again? Oh, there he goes. Oh, he's going back again now. So, it just gets in the way. And the final S of BESS, so you've got breathe, expand, stance. The final S, smile. Hello, I'm happy to be here. Nice to see you. And you will find that many in the audience will smile back at you, and you've immediately made an emotional connection. You said, I'm happy to be here. I'm confident. This is fun. It's going to be nice. Everything's good. All of that comes from one smile, as opposed to looking terrified and, what am I going to say next? Yeah. So even if you feel terrified, a terrified smile is better than no smile at all. So that's best.
I like it.
If you operate best as you on, you're going to give it your best shot.
Awesome. So PPD and BESS.
Yeah, I love acronyms because I have a terrible memory, so it helps me.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, those are awesome tips for speaking in front of a large audience. And I know a lot of your content, especially in your TED Talks, is based on it could be for a large audience, but it also could just be general communication with a coworker, with a boss, like you said, for a proposal or just maybe a big conversation that you need to prepare for. You mentioned the 7 deadly sins of speaking. Can you talk about those habits that we should avoid when having big talks or big conversations? Absolutely, yes. There are many things that many of us do that have the effect of making us harder to listen to, harder to understand, harder to be with. And so I want to be clear, I'm not saying these things are really sins. I mean, it's slightly tongue-in-cheek. They're not things that you may not ever do. Okay. They're not prescribed. But they are things that if they become kind of strong habits for you, they will make you harder to listen to. And they'll get in the way of you getting your message across, making a difference, enrolling people, inspiring people, whatever, connecting with people, relating, whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. So let's have a little run through the 7 deadly sins of speaking. And incidentally, they also apply to listening pretty much as well. So the first one is gossip. Now, I define gossip as speaking ill of somebody who's not present. So saying nice things about somebody who's not there, that's not gossip, that's fine. And saying nasty things to somebody to their face, well, it may be rude, but it's not gossip. Mm-hmm. Gossip is kind of malicious because it's unkind, often untrue or exaggerated, or did you hear? I've just heard this, with no attribution, no checking, And unfortunately, that's become a habit in the world, hasn't it? With the internet, we don't check, we don't fact check. We just, did you see that? Mm-hmm. And pass it on. And hence, so much fake news and distress is created in the world. So if you meet a gossip, it's a little bit captivating, I suppose, in a way. There's a kind of guilty pleasure about indulging in gossip. But we don't really believe gossips, and we know that they're not that nice because they're doing this a lot. Mm-hmm. And often what they're saying is untrue. We don't want to listen to a liar. So I would advise
abstain from gossip or keep away from it as much as possible. And incidentally, I did an exercise years ago of fully abstaining from gossip. And when you carry that through, that's really difficult. You know, you can barely consume any news media because so much of it is opinion gossip, unsubstantiated and so forth. And certainly social media would be right out. So
Wow.
there are major implications to taking that on.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting inquiry to think about the effect gossip has in our lives and in our souls.
So
That's a significant.
Yeah, quick question for you there, Julian. So you abstained from gossiping about anyone, but also consuming others' gossip. Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. So was there conversations you're having where like someone was trying to gossip with you and you're like, you had to exit the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And, you can do that politely. Sorry, I've just forgotten. I must, a little, I'm not advocating lying in conversation, but, there are times, as I said, if we're going to talk about Hale later on, honesty is absolutely crucial in communication.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, unscrupulous honesty, complete honesty may not be the answer.
Right.
Oh, God, you're looking awful today. Well, you don't have to say that, do you? It's not necessary. So again, sometimes you can exit a conversation by coming up with something that's, polite, as opposed to saying, you are gossiping, I'm going to leave, which may be a little bit forthright.
Right.
So gossip, the first of the deadly sins. The second is what you could call judgmentalism, really condemnation. The kind of parent whose child comes home and says, I got 95% in the test. And the response is, what happened to the other 5? Nothing is ever good enough. Everybody is wrong. Everybody is to be criticized. I don't know if you ever saw that brilliant film about drumming. What was it called? I've forgotten its name now. But the hideous teachers comment is there are no 2 words in the English language more destructive than good job.
Huh.
So he's not a fan of praise. And I think it's very important to be balanced in that. And, it's wearing. We've all had bosses like that, haven't we, where they they just tell people off the whole time. And, people have had parents like that as well. And it doesn't help.
It's tough to be around.
Growing up. It is very tough to be around. So that's judgmentalism. Then we have complaining, which is actually, now let me do negativity first. The story I told in the TED Talk about my mother is absolutely true. Towards the end of her life, she was in hospital. She'd broken a wrist, and I took in a paper and I said, oh, look, it's October the 1st today. And she said, I know, isn't it dreadful?
Right. I gotta say, Julian, I feel like, I don't know if that's a common thing with old age, but I just heard my parents recently talking about that with my grandparents, and I don't know what it is, but I think old age may bring on some sense of negativity.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can understand that. I'm 64, and so mortality, definitely becomes more of a topic in your mind the older you get. You wonder, how many Christmases will I see? And, you can get into negative spins on that, or you can seek to enjoy and squeeze the most out of every second that you have, which is a rather more positive approach. But I completely understand that, yes, people can go down, the dark side on that one and become quite negative towards the end of it. There's not a lot of fun about becoming old, things ache.
Yep.
Things don't work so well, and so I can understand that. Nevertheless, unfortunately, my mother did become, it was massively negative about everything. And it's wearing to be around somebody, again, who's completely negative. The sun's out. Oh, I bet it's going to rain later.
Right.
Oh, come on.
Right.
You have to take a little walk away and regenerate positivity.
Yeah, it is draining for sure.
So moving on from negativity to the next one, which is complaining, the English national pastime, as I described it on the TED stage. I mean, British people really are quite good at complaining. I'm not talking about complaining if they bring you bad food in a restaurant. Complain, of course, but it's complaining about things you can't fix, things you can't do anything about, the weather, sport, whatever it may be. It's viral misery.
Yeah.
And it's not a nice thing to do.
Yeah. Things you have no control over.
To be around people. Yeah. And it becomes a habit. I have met people who are so habitually into complaining. It's just, again, it's kind of really wearing to be around them. Can't you take pleasure in anything? Come on. So that's complaining. Then we have exaggeration, would be another one to consider. Hyperbole, which is the Greek for to throw beyond, hyperbole. And there is a lot of that around these days. We do it unconsciously. A great number of us do it. I gave the example on the TED stage of the word awesome, which, unfortunately your great country has made almost worthless. If a pair of trainers, awesome, how do you describe that? Amazing. Awesome means striking awe into your heart. Really? You feel awestruck by those trainers?
Totally.
I don't think so. So there's a kind of language inflation going on. Once upon a time, it was to be excited. Now we have to be super excited, don't we?
Right.
Probably in a few years, it'll have to be hyper excited or mega excited or super duper excited or something. So this kind of inflation with language is rather unfortunate. Words like fantastic, amazing, stunning, they actually had meanings once, and now they all just mean good, which is a shame, I think. So we've lost something there.
I'm totally a violator
of course, if we
using those words. Totally a violator.
Well, I don't totally, but perhaps some from time to time you might be. So the thing is, if we get into the habit of hyperbole, of throwing beyond, of bigging up everything that we say, there is a tendency to move into lying. And, that is more of a murky area. So great exercise. I challenge anybody watching this, listening to this, a great exercise just for a day, for an hour, for a few minutes. Say exactly what you mean without any amplification, without turning it up to 11. Say exactly what you mean and see how that goes for you. You probably sound a little bit mild these days, but it's a great exercise to kind of reestablish a baseline and get back to not having everything having to be awesome, amazing, and incredible, and so forth. So that's exaggeration. Then we have excuses. Not my fault. It was this, it was that. That great scene from the Blues Brothers where John Belushi is explaining why he didn't get married to brilliant. He ends up with locusts. So, excuses not great, because if you're endlessly making excuses, if you're what I can often call a blame thrower, it's always somebody else's fault, then you don't learn anything. If you can take it on and say, I did wrong, it was my fault, and what I'm going to do is change this in the future so it doesn't happen again, then you've made an improvement, haven't you?
Yeah.
And
don't
next
like
time you
blame
go
throwers.
around the loop, you're a bit. Absolutely. So that's excuses. I think we're on to the final one now, which is dogmatism. And that is my way or the highway. And this is now, I have to say, a global disease. We have lost contact with the differentiation between opinion and fact. There's so much false stuff out there that fact is hard to establish, even if you want to, but most people aren't bothering to at all. And this haze between opinion and fact is causing so much conflict in the world. I'm not talking about people believing the wrong thing, like Putin's version of Russian and Ukrainian history is nonsense, but he believes it. So he believes that's a fact, and that's driven this awful invasion. Now, I'm not talking so much about that. If people believe things are facts, they're just wrong and they need to be educated. But it's when we take on board opinions that we have on the basis of no evidence whatsoever and thump the table and insist that they're true. Well, there's no challenge in that. And of course, a lot of growth is about challenge. You have thesis, antithesis, and they put together to create synthesis, which is how we grow all the time. But most of us, unfortunately, don't go out onto the internet to seek challenge, do we? We go out onto the internet to seek affirmation. There you are. I knew I was right. Thousands of people agree with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but millions don't.
Right.
But you're not looking at them. So, I think this is at the root of so many problems we've got in the world. Polarization, silos of entrenched opinion, extremism, lunatic conspiracy theories, all of this stuff, which is being amplified by the ability of the internet to create these ghettos and bring together people who have extreme views and who reinforce each other and never seek challenge or difference. So it's a really big problem. Yeah. And so I think we've got to be very careful about dogmatism in the world at the moment. So there you are, 7 deadly sins of speaking, which can get in the way. They're holes in your pocket.
Yeah, 7 things we should all avoid when speaking that I think will cause others to tune us out and make us less heard. You mentioned hail, and hail is the 4 cornerstones of powerful speech. Can you walk us through hail and how we can implement those 4 cornerstones to make our speech as powerful as possible?
Sure. It's another lovely acronym. And this one also means to greet or acclaim enthusiastically, which is quite nice. So as in Hail Caesar. The H stands for honesty. And by honesty, I mean being clear and straight in what you say, not obfuscating, not using huge words where small ones will do. Ideally, not using jargon, not trying to impress people by confusing them. So being clear and straight in what you say. As I said earlier, it may need to be tempered. I'm not talking about being absolutely honest all the time, like was it in Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein? I think he had a person who was a truth sayer who had to say the absolute truth at all times and only the truth. Well, not necessarily that far. But being clear and straight all the time is a great direction to point in, and these things are not all, they're not an impeccable standard. I'm not talking about perfectionism across all of these things. I'm talking about pointing in this direction, having this intention, and it will help a great deal. The A of hail is authenticity. And that is to say, being yourself. It's a lot more difficult to try and be somebody else a lot of the time. We all have a tendency to be a bit chameleon-like. I mean, you won't necessarily use the same language with your grandparents as you would with your young friends. You might speak in different ways. There might be profanity in one place with the grandparents, but not with the young friends. All sorts of things can change. But as long as you're being authentically you, we have different aspects to our character. That's how we are as human beings. We're complex and multifaceted, but not pretending to be somebody else. And that's much more difficult to carry. On stage, you can generally see if somebody's doing that, not generating themselves, but trying to be somebody else. Unless you're an actor, of course, or you're doing it for a reason, if it's intentional. So authenticity, be yourself. It's great. The I, integrity, be your word. If you say it, you do it. If you say it, it happens. Well, that's powerful speaking. I remember a long, long time ago, I was in India, and I went to the abandoned city of Fatehpur Sikri, which is where the Mughal emperors were for several decades, till apparently the water supply ran out and they just left it. So it's all standing there. You can go and stand in the Mughal emperor's throne room and sit in his seat, which is where he would dispense justice. That person to be torn apart by elephants, this person to be given an estate, whatever it would be, whatever he said.
Yeah.
And it's quite spooky to be sitting there thinking, a few hundred years ago, I would have been murdered without getting anywhere near this place, and the power that was there. Now, of course, if you're somebody who says it and then it never happens, your words start to evaporate like puddles in the sun. People just don't take you seriously at all. So it's important to have integrity, to do what you say. And the L of hail is love. And that's the thing that tempers the honesty. So you can be kind, not necessarily say that thing, maybe true, but doesn't need to be said, or say a thing with kindness as opposed to, just blunt, brutal honesty. And I'm talking about wishing people well here. Fundamentally, it's not romantic love I'm talking about. It's what Christians would call agape. It's what loving kindness. So it's wishing people well. Mm-hmm. I had a great mentor years ago who taught me a great exercise for this, which counteracts the way we often walk around, in a city. People get in your way and you think, get out of my way, you idiot, and you ugly this and you fat that, and whatever it might be, the really rude things in our heads. And of course, if you meet somebody's eye when you're thinking that kind of thing, you immediately look away. So it's not a nice way to be. The counteraction to that is to practice thinking the words, bless you, as you walk about, or I wish you well, if too religious. I'm not talking about religious bless you, simply blessing people, wishing them well. And the effect is magical. Now, if you do that for a little while in a city, you'll start feeling like you're walking a foot above the ground. You meet people's eye, you smile at each other, you make a connection, you happy and part of the human race, not this antagonistic, negative energy that we can get into so easily. So bless you, person who just got in my way. It's a lot nicer way to walk around. So love, wishing people well. And if you're on stage, that's critical, because the biggest thing to remember about talking on a stage, it's not about you. That is fundamental. So many people get this wrong, and it becomes about me wanting to be loved, me wanting to be, get lots of affirmation and applause, me wanting to impress the socks off people, me wanting to look great. It's not about me. It's about the gift I can give to those people. It's about them, and it's about wishing them well and wanting to do a good job for them. So when you do your wedding speech, Patrick, what your motivation there is to give them a great time, to let them have some insight into this couple or probably the groom in your case, and to let them have a laugh and so forth, just to give them a nice time. And if you focus on that and not looking impressive, it's so much easier.
I love it.
So that fail.
Yeah, that's a really cool way to think about it. Well, such great advice for the cornerstones of powerful speech with hail. You also mentioned the toolbox, and these are some things I think that can really enhance the way that we come off when we're speaking again, and whether it's a big talk or whether it's just a normal conversation. And I've found when I am training folks at our company to go in and give presentations, these tend to be harder to teach than some of the points, the principles that we went through earlier. And the notes I have written down are register, timbre, prosody, pace, silence, pitch, volume. Can you walk through some of these tools and let the audience know how they can use them when they are giving some sort of talk or having some sort of conversation?
Sure. Well, breathing and posture are two of the important tools in the toolbox, actually. And so it is worth developing a breathing practice and working on postures so that your vocal cords need to be vertical. We do a lot of speaking on phones, for example, where we're leaning forward like this at a desk, and I am now stretching my vocal cords, and it's harder to make them sound good. Of course, if you put your head right back in your chest like this, you're compressing your vocal cords. So you want your vocal cords to be vertical. And that's why good posture is really going to help. So breathing, posture, worth working on. And of course, gesture helps. There's a whole piece on body language, on gestures, on movement, which, that's people have written whole books on that. And there are some very good ones out there. So it's worth investigating those things as well and finding your own style. Am I a hand waving person, or am I very still and very focused? And so how do you do that? The one gesture I would say try to avoid is one that's very common. So I'll mention it because a lot of people make this mistake. It's an open-handed gesture. So having your hands out like that at waist level, where I've now got them, that's a begging gesture. You're saying, I haven't got any, I'm harmless, please, please. If you're saying, please give generously, that's entirely appropriate. But if you're saying, we are going to win this fight, with your hands like that, you're giving a completely mixed message. Politicians like to wave their hands in front of them aimlessly as they're speaking. All you need to do is turn the thumbs vertical, and you have a completely different gesture. And you'll see politicians talking like this a great deal with their hands vertical. If they were talking like this, it would give a completely different message.
And for the folks that are just listening, so the first gesture that Julian's talking about is like, you don't want to have your palms facing forward by your waist because it almost looks like you're begging, right? And up. And
palms up. That's open-handed, and it's not a strong gesture. And
then so your advice would be to turn them in.
Yeah, put the thumbs on the top, have the fingers vertical in that sense. Your hands vertical, not flat with the palms up. And that's a perfectly neutral gesture. A lot of people will do that. So that's something on gesture. Well, let's talk about the tone of the voice, the pitch. And there's a couple of things there. First of all, there is where you resonate from, without getting into register. I mean, the technicalities of register. There's where you resonate your voice from. Of course, your voice is all made in the vocal cords in your throat. However, you have a lot of resonating chambers, and with practice, you can change where you're resonating from. And it's worth practicing this, because if you resonate up in your nose like this, have a very light voice, and if I go into my throat, that's where most people will talk from most of the time. I'm just resonating in my throat. Whereas if I go down and resonate in my chest, you can hear the difference immediately. Now, the chest is large. It's a big resonating cavity, if you like. And you can practice doing this by speaking and putting your fingers on your sternum, which is your chest bone in the middle of your chest. Yeah. And as you're speaking, seek to vibrate, to feel the vibration of your voice in your fingers. And you'll naturally start coming down here into the chest. Right. Why is that important? Because deep voices are taken more seriously than high voices.
Yeah. You mentioned that most politicians that we elect have deeper voices, right?
Well, yes, technically the research showed that we tend to vote, other things being equal, we will vote for politicians with deeper voices. And certainly Margaret Thatcher, the ex-Prime Minister of Britain, had vocal coaching to take her voice down 2 tones because she felt she would be taken more seriously when she was speaking in the Houses of Parliament. So, the reason for this is fairly obvious. Big things have deeper voices than little things. Elephants, deeper than mice. And you need to worry more about big things than you do about little things, because they tend to be a lot more serious and dangerous. Yeah. So we have this connection that deep voices are more to be taken seriously. And obviously, people have different physical capabilities, but we can all try to resonate in our chest. And, we're not all going to get to James Earl Jones right down here, and some people have got very light voices up here, but you can practice and practice, and you can certainly get the most out of the equipment you've been given and resonate as much as possible in the chest. Not all the time. And don't make it unreal and unrealistic and go around speaking like this, because people won't take you very seriously.
Right. It's like Elizabeth Holmes.
Just a question of doing that.
Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos.
Oh yeah, I met her once at TED Med.
Really?
When that thing was all the rage. Yes.
Wow.
So that's something about pitch, getting your pitch, to be more authoritative, if you like. And then the other great thing about pitch, of course, is prosody or intonation, the intonation part. Prosody is everything about how you speak. It's not just the intonation, it's the gaps, the pacing and so forth, but in between the words. But I tend to think of it as the sing-song, and it's such an important part of speech. If I speak on one note the whole time, it's rather less interesting than if I move my voice about. And there's a reason why we call that monotonous. It's monotone. Is monotonous. It's boring to have no prosody.
Yeah.
Now, it varies country to country, and it varies culture to culture, and it varies very much person to person. If you're somebody who's got restrictive prosody, and you tend to talk in this way the whole time, and that's how you talk, and your range is very limited, you are going to have trouble inspiring people.
Right.
So my advice on this is to practice wildly extending your range. It's like any muscle, if you want to become stronger or more limber, more flexible, you have to practice, and you get better a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
It's the same with your prosody.
Okay.
So you can take out a book and read it with wild prosody, going up and down like this, completely mad, and really go for it. Because then what will happen is your natural range will come out and out and out, and you'll start to get more expressive in what you say.
That's a very cool
some
exercise.
People have got,
I was going to say, Julian, you mentioned other cultures, and one that came to mind, and you mentioned, I want to say it's repetitive prosody, where a lot of stuff sounds like questions. It's a statement, but it sounds like a question. The first thing that came to mind is some friends that are Australian. It's like so much of what they're saying came off like a question, but it was really a statement. I'm not sure if that's something that you've seen as well.
Oh, big time. Oh, there are two things I would discourage if we're talking about kind of register and the way that you're speaking. One of them is that it's called high rising terminal, where every sentence is said as if it were a question. The other name for it, incidentally, is Australian questioning intonation. So it did originate probably in Australia. It's now become very popular on the west coast of America, in California and so forth. And the reason I would discourage it, well, there are two reasons, actually. First, because it's repetitive. And that's unfortunate, because repetitive cadences are less expressive. Your palate is restricted. If you're doing the same thing every time, you don't have the ability to get your meaning across quite in the same way. So repetitive. And the second is that it's weak, because what's happening there, as you end every statement as if it were a question, is you're kind of eliding a little, is that okay? Is that all right with you? Do you understand? So it's always this little question that's happening at the end of every single sentence. And it doesn't come across as a powerful way to speak. You wouldn't find a great leader standing on a stage and speaking in that way, because it's questioning, and questions, which are wonderful things in conversation, are very powerful. And if you're asking this little kind of unknown question the whole time, it robs your speaking of a lot of power. The other kind of intonation, or it's a register really, which I would strongly advise people to avoid, is vocal fry, which also has become very common on the west coast of America. And unfortunately, really throughout the world, I bump into people. I would say, it's just my experience, and I may be wrong on this, more among women than among men, more among females than males. Okay. I tend to hear it. And what I mean by vocal fry is speaking like this, is very croaky. So ending every sentence, like that, croakiness. Yeah, I'm really excited about that. That's great. Well, for me, it doesn't sound particularly interesting, but I do hear a lot of people talking like that. And if you want to check it out, there's tons of examples on YouTube of vocal fry. Again, I would suggest, if you're in the habit of speaking like that, try to get out of it. Two reasons. One, it's not great for your voice, and you're really demeaning an amazing instrument. When I talk about this instrument we all play, the human voice is astounding. It's wonderful. And it's a shame to be talking like that. You're not really exploring what it can do. But secondly, the research is now quite clear that people speaking with vocal fry are considered to be less intelligent, less employable, and less convincing than people who do not do vocal fry. So it's a form of speaking which is not doing you any favors.
Yeah,
whether you're in a job interview or proposing marriage, best not to vocal fry.
Okay, great. Well,
do you want me to go on with some other tools?
I would love to hear you talk about broadcasting, because I think that broadcasting is something that we're kind of taught to do when giving presentations and projecting your voice. But I know you talk about doing it too much. It can have a negative impact on what people are hearing and them being able to digest what you're saying.
Yes. I mean, if you're talking here about volume, really, which is a very important thing to be conscious of. So the message behind all of this really is to be conscious of the tools. Most people don't even think about having a toolbox for their voice. Become conscious of them and start to practice with them. And then you can find your own way. You can find the best way to be you with your voice, which may not be how you've always spoken. We pick these things up. I mean, I think it's a tragedy. I was talking about this, that we teach reading and writing in school, and it's a national scandal if children leave school unable to read or write. We don't teach speaking. Not at all do we teach listening, which is bonkers to me, because these two skills are absolutely fundamental in determining our outcomes in life, our happiness, our effectiveness, our well-being, and yet we're expected to pick them up along the way without any formal teaching at all. It's just mad.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think volume is a good example of this, where you get some people are just loud the whole time, and other people, I've had people in seminars I've given where I've been coaching people, and they said, yeah, I am shouting. This is as loud as I can speak. Well, probably not. It's a question of never having practiced, and it's a question of probably having been suppressed a lot in life. And that the loud person, maybe there's a reason that person's so loud. They might be partly deaf, or they might have hearing problems. Maybe they can't hear what they're doing, or maybe they've had to be like that. They've been in a family of 15 and had to shout for everything. I don't know. There's always a backstory in these things. The important thing is to be conscious of the effect you're having on other people. So it's not just, again, about you. It's about getting the ball over the net. Yep. It's about connecting. It's about relating. It's about, inspiring or teaching or entertaining or whatever it might be that you want to do with somebody else. Are you doing it in a way that they can understand? Which is where I talk a lot in my course, in my book. I talk about speaking into a listening. It's a fundamental concept. There's always a listening, and we've been focusing very much on my TED Talk on speaking, which was the 5th one I did. But I did a TED Talk on listening 2 years before that. And I was talking about this, that we all listen through filters, and everybody's filters are different. So it's a fundamental mistake that so many people make, to assume everybody listens like I do. They don't. Every individual's listening is different, and our listening changes over time. It's different at 9 a.m. to the way it is at 5. It's different after you've had great news compared to after you've had terrible news. Different if you've had a good sleep to if you're really tired, and so forth. So when you're speaking, the question to ask yourself is, what's the listening? What's the listening I'm speaking into? Yeah. Is this a person who's very slow, and therefore I should just slow down a little bit? Because if I speak like this to somebody who's really, really slow, they just going to go, whoa, it's too fast. I can't understand you. So what's the listening? That's kind of polite. It's how you hit the bullseye instead of missing the target altogether in your speaking. It's by asking that very important question.
Julian,
and that's true with volume.
I was going to say, you have such great content on listening. I think that it could fill an entire episode, but I highly recommend that anyone that is in the audience right now go and listen to Julian's TED Talk on how to be a better listener. Is that what it's titled?
It's 5 practices for conscious listening, I think, or something like that. But it's the 3rd one. And to me, listening is even more important than speaking. In connection with other people, it's very difficult to be a brilliant speaker if you are not also a good listener. And it also, I think, is the most skill that's so eroded and absent in much of the world today. Politicians meet to have talks. I wish they would meet and have listens instead.
Yeah, I also think it's the most important sales tool in general, and it probably the most underrated as well. But Julian, I know
Without doubt.
we're running up on time a little bit here. The final major question I wanted to ask you is, you have the number 7 most viewed TED Talk of all time. Obviously, you are an expert on speech and on presenting, but is there any secret sauce that you think caused that to be more viewed than your other TED Talks? Or why do you think it is so popular beyond some of the content that was included in that TED Talk?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, the topic itself would be partly to do with that. It's interesting that the TED Talk I gave about speaking has been seen by 5 times as many people as the TED Talk on listening. So we are more interested in sending than in receiving. We're more interested in being understood than understanding. And therein lies, I think, a great challenge for all of us. The old Epictetus comment about we have 2 ears and 1 mouth very much still is something we need to think about, I think. So the topic was part of it. In terms of the delivery, well, I did all the things that we've been talking about, PPD, big time. And actually, I did a video with a guy called Neil Gordon, who's a top US speaker coach who works with a lot of public speakers. So we picked that talk apart and created, I think it was about a 20-minute video where we kept stopping it and saying, okay, what I did there was this, and the reason that worked is this, and so forth. So anybody's interested in that, if you swing by juliantreasure.com, that's freely available. It's a download there. You can watch that video and kind of unpick the things that perhaps made that talk so successful.
Very cool. I didn't know that. I'll have to do that when I have some free time coming up here. But Julian, I also want to be respectful of your time. I know we're coming up on the hour here. Before we jump into the last 5 rapid fire questions, you mentioned that people can find you at juliantreasure.com. Is there anything, I know you have a book that you're working on as well that you're going to be coming out with in the future. Is there anything you want to say on that book?
Well, that'll be my 3rd book. The first one was Sound Business, which for anybody who's in business is quite useful. It's all about using sound for profit in business. Sound is very powerful. It's what I'm all about, really. So everything I do is about sound. The second book is called, I've just forgotten the name of my own book. Hold on a second. It's called How to Be Heard. And that book is very much about what we've been talking about, which is the skills of speaking and listening. And it's the same content that's in my 7.5-hour course. So those 2 books exist, and you're right, very thrilled that I'm about to start writing a 3rd book, which will be all about sound and how important it is, how it affects us, why we should be listening to it, and all the different types of sound there are in the world and indeed in the universe to listen to through history as well. So it's my life's work, really. I'm really excited about taking that one on. More about that in the coming months, I guess. I think it'll probably, this is the first time I've talked about it. It'll probably be officially announced in a couple of months' time.
Great. Well, that's very exciting, and we will have to have you on again to talk about some of the highlights of that book as well, because I think it could be super applicable to the insurance world. But with that said, I think we should jump into these rapid fire questions because I'm super interested to get your responses here. If you're ready, I can dive in.
Okay, shoot.
First question, who is your favorite speaker of all time?
Oh, that's a good question. I would have to say Ken Robinson. I had the honor of meeting Sir Ken Robinson before he tragically died. And I think that TED Talk's number one for a very good reason. And the story he tells about the little girl drawing a picture of God. I mean, guys, if you haven't seen this, go see it.
Okay.
There's a reason that's number one of all time. Yeah, Ken.
I haven't seen it. I will definitely check it out. Okay.
Brilliant.
Question number 2. Which of your books would you recommend to folks that are working in the insurance world?
Probably Sound Business. Well, both. I mean, it depends. Sound Business, if you're, I mean, in audio branding, I run a company called the Sound Agency, have done for 20 years. It's all about the sound of customer experience and the sound branding, which is now becoming de rigueur. So there's not many big brands out there that haven't thought about sound now and aren't using it with sonic logos or music or whatever it might be. Sound, carefully designed sound in spaces. So the first book, Sound Business, is all about that from a business perspective. If you're a business manager, it's very interesting. And I would point you in the direction of telephone sound. There's a chapter in there about telephone sound, which I think is losing trillions of dollars a year all over the world. Press 1 for this, press 2 for that. How many people have become frustrated? All of us put our hands up with those stupid systems designed not by marketing people, never secret shopped, never tested. And, older people hate them. We have aging demographics everywhere in the world. So, yeah, Sound Business for all that stuff. But if you're talking about selling, which in insurance is quite an important profession, or listening to customer complaints, then How to Be Heard very much so, because as you rightly said, Patrick, the most important part of selling is listening. And there's a lot about listening in How to Be Heard, which we haven't had time to talk about. So get them both.
Okay, wonderful. Question number 3, what is the best part of giving a TED Talk?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I loved all the elements of it, preparing it, the people that you meet and connect with. I would say that probably because there's a great connection on a TED stage, and you can see that in my final TED Talk. I mean, it was the 5th one in 5 years, so I really knew what I was doing by then. And June, who was running that part of TED, introduced me as, it was called TED University, that particular element of TED, as I'd done 5 times. And she said, TED University, rock star Julian Treasure. So I was feeling very confident, and the connection I got with the audience was tremendous. I mean, I knew quite a lot of them by then. But even if I had been first timer, giving a talk, it opens so many connections. And that's what TED is all about. If you go to TED, I mean, it's not cheap. And people said to Chris, you're mad if you put these videos on, nobody will go. And the opposite happened. And the reason for that is because not only do you see the talks, which you can see online, I mean, that's fine. There is that moment, but you get to speak to them afterwards. You get to relate. And so TED is all about connection with other people and with ideas. So it would be the connection, I think, was the best part of all my TED Talks.
Okay, cool. That's actually a perfect transition to the next question, which on your TED Talk, How to Speak So That People Want to Listen, you have almost 10,000 comments. Is there any comment that stands out to you?
Do you know what? Not to read comments. Are you talking about on the TED website or on YouTube?
Oh, I'm talking about YouTube.
Okay, I don't read YouTube comments.
Probably for the best.
And, yes. I mean, I'm sure lots of them are very nice, but you do get a lot of trolling in the comment sections. So I try not to read them. I do get seduced into, I read the Times newspaper online every day, and I do get sometimes seduced into going down into comment sections, which hopefully are relatively intelligent, but you still get lots of people being rude and offensive and aggressive and so forth, even with the bots trying to remove all that stuff. So I'm sorry, I don't read comments.
No, it's probably a good practice to have when you have such a popular video like your TED Talk. Final question here. Do you have a favorite leader or politician based on their speaking ability? Is there someone that stands out that is a leader that could be present now or maybe in the past that you think is a speaker that we should take as a good example of someone who can be emulated?
That is tough, because I have to say that the today's crop of politicians are somewhere short of inspiring, generally, and not
Agreed.
just in how they, but in what they say. It's become, politics has become mudslinging. We're just about to have a contest for a new prime minister in the UK, and they've already started. They're tearing each other apart, and it's rather sad to see that that's the way people compete now, is by throwing mud at other people. I think if you're talking about rhetoric, then there were politicians 20 or 30 years ago who were quite good. Dennis Healey, who was the famous chancellor in the Labour Party, described a Conservative opponent who had just stood up and attacked him in Parliament. He said that was a little bit like being savaged by a dead sheep. So there was a lot of wit that was used in those days, and indeed rhetoric. But we've gone a long way from the days when people used to sit and listen to a politician speak for 10 or 20 minutes. Now sound bites rule the day. So I'm trying to think of, you can think of the great speakers of the past. Winston Churchill, although undeniably not a very nice man in many ways, a brilliant speaker who came out with some amazing, memorable phrases. So yes, it's hard to think of anybody in the world at the moment who is particularly inspiring in the way they speak. Anybody who focuses on the positive, on uplifting and inspiring people, as opposed to being negative, destructive, and so forth. So let's just say Winston Churchill then. With the proviso that he had many faults, he certainly could speak.
Well said. Well said. Well, Julian, thank you so much for spending the time with me. I think that there's so much more to uncover in terms of the content that you have when it comes to listening, your new book, and some of the topics that you go deep on in general. So would love to have you back on. And I think this is an excellent place to wrap up, but I just have to say thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a very fun, interesting conversation. So I'd be delighted to come back and go on.
All right. Thanks, Julian. I'll talk to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Please download, subscribe, and leave a review on whatever platform you are listening on. And feel free to reach out to me at pat@evolvedbrokerpodcast.com with any comments or suggestions for the podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by First Insurance Funding. First is the leading premium finance company in insurance and is known throughout the industry for their personalized service and quote flexibility. If you're tired of sending quote requests for smaller premiums to multiple companies, not leaving enough time to negotiate larger opportunities, then choose First as your primary financing source and experience the First difference today.